Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Fiber Broadband Association webinar. Today's webinar is titled The BEAD Reset, How to Compete, Comply, and Conquer, Whether Receiving Funding or Not, which is presented by VETRO and CCI Systems. I'm Lisa Rosen, webinar producer at FBA. Let's go over a few housekeeping details before we begin. Please note that all attendees are in listen-only mode. We will have a Q&A session following the presentation. Please ask your questions throughout the presentation using the questions tool located in the lower left-hand side of your screen below the video window. We also have several resources available in the related content tool located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, as well as the reactions button if you want to share instant feedback with the presenters. This webinar will also be available on demand on the FBA website under the Events Webinar section. Finally, at the end of the webinar, you will be prompted to complete a brief survey. Please take a moment to respond as your feedback is valuable to us. With that, let's get started. Today, we are pleased to be joined by Chad Kay, Senior Director of TFS at CCI Systems, Jeremiah Sloan, Head of Product Marketing at VETRO, and Pete Pizzotillo, Product and Partner Evangelist at VETRO. Okay, Pete, over to you.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Hey, Jeremiah and Chad, looking forward to this discussion. Before we get kicked off, though, I do want to put a poll question up to give us a little bit of context to the audience that we have today. Can we move to the poll question, please? All right. So what are your plans for this fiscal year? If you get a chance to fill that out, BEAD or capital status, doing both BEAD and capitally funded projects. You're all in BEAD and waiting to sign for BEAD funding. You're on the fence, awarded but haven't signed for your award yet. And you have capitally funded projects, no BEAD. And then last, no plans. So hopefully it's not E. Let's give that a second to cook. Fellas, so, we have an interesting conversation. There's been a lot of presentations in the past couple of years around BEAD. I think the angle that we're talking about is interesting because there's really two sides to the BEAD coin, right? And we're going to unpack those things today. But I do want to kind of frame up the topic, right? We talked about this as a funding, not as a funding event, but really a market restructuring, right? So before we get into that, is if we can go to the poll results, or should we come back to the poll results? Okay, here we go. Poll results. Too impatient here. So 45% of you said they're doing both BEAD and capitally funded projects. There's nobody who's all in on BEAD. 18% are on the fence, so that means they've been awarded but haven't signed for the award yet. About 9% are capitally funded projects, so no BEAD, and 27% have no plans. All right, so going to be interesting. Let's go to the next slide here. It's the title that we just covered. So yeah, getting to this idea that we're not going to be talking about this as a funding event, that this is really a fundamental restructuring of the market. I want to start with you, Chad, and talk a little bit about, there's kind of three aspects that we are trying to unpack around the capital, competition, and compliance. How is this forcing network operators to get out of their comfort zone by this new capital being infused in the market?
Well, you know what, actually, I might do it inside out. I might do it on competition side first, just due to the fact that the safe zones are closing in on our folks that have just been, sitting in their little market forever in a day, right? I mean, what's happening is that all of a sudden areas of rural development have been sitting there forever, whether it was supported by DSL or nothing at all, obviously, which is part of the BEAD program. But their little zones are closing in now, right? So all of a sudden you have competitors coming from all angles, 360 degrees. And then to back up to the capital bullet point, it's a different version of it due to the fact that they're not paying 100% of it. They're getting funded, right? So if you wanted to defend yourself against them, well, that's 100% all in. I have to pay for that. So I think that's a lot of the complexity that starts with it. And I know we're going to get into some bigger details and talking points about it. But I think the compliance aspect of it is equally empowering for both sides. I think what's happening here is that the cards are on the table. They know who's coming towards them now, right? And again, we're going to talk about it a little bit more. But I think the transparency aspect of it is that they know who's out there. They know who's coming at them. Now it's a matter of what you're going to do.
Yeah, no, it's great points, Chad. So Jeremiah, you've been involved in grants in the past. How has federal and state funding been flowing? It's been flowing for years. How is this any different than RDOF or CAF2 in your experience?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. So we've been on this BEAD topic as an industry for some time now, and there have been versions of BEAD that have unfolded. You look back at the June 2025 NTIA notice, right? And that sort of shifted the BEAD landscape a bit. But still, we're talking about something here that is very different than what we've done in the past. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, this is a decentralized, sort of state-led initiative. So maybe, having gone through CAF2 and RDOF personally in the past and been in the utilities on federal programs even before those, in the past, it was largely about a market grab or a land grab where incumbents had preferential preference, and then sort of you did a race to the bottom with a reverse auction for everything else. Well, now with it being decentralized and at the state level, we have more players, more actors involved, maybe more local competition. We are technology neutral now, and so that opens up the playing field to all sorts of challenges and opportunities. And really what we're talking about is this is less a focus on grabbing land and more a focus on the individual rooftops, the BSLs, and how can I protect those markets I have today or reach the new rooftops in ways that is operationally efficient. It's sort of shuffling the cards across the playing field.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. So let's get into this, right? So as we said, there's really two sides to this coin, the awardees and non-awardees. There's probably three sides, some of the people that opted out completely. So we have to update the slide there. So Chad, what does this world look like now if you're an awardee? What's right in front of you?
So obviously anybody who's participated in BEAD in the past, there was enough diversity in the timeline to actually space this thing out so that you actually had a little bit of run room as far as resources state to state, as an example. With the reset, obviously, I think the biggest risk right now is we're all starting at the same starting line for all participants. So, I mean, give or take a couple of weeks here or there, but now the stress is on, basically the labor pool and material. So that's probably the biggest risk of all that we'll dive into a little bit. Compliance is also a huge burden. Even though it was real, I would say back when it first initially started, but the fact that you have mixed technologies, so really those initial check-ins, seeing what's going to happen as far as data throughput, how you're going to actually support your customers. I know there's a big debate as a topic for Starlink and if they're going to be playing now because they won't allow them to bend the rules. And I think another compliance aspect that's been talked about but not really defined is pressure of clawbacks possibly if you don't hit your marks. So I think compliance really now puts a little bit more pressure on someone's game plan. If you were going to actually build out a bigger area and now you're only doing 3 individual areas out of 10, does it make financial sense to still go after them? So I think that's probably another portion of it that, people have to start resonating and think about, do we still participate? And then last, the capital pressure aspect of it, time's ticking, even though, I live up here in Michigan and we still got snow. And even though people are going to start getting money, the ground's still frozen. So the clock's ticking, you got your money. Why aren't you working yet, right? Even though we waited, and I'm going to say this honestly, even though we waited 4 years plus to get this happening, it's here. Now let's hurry up and wait. So there's a lot of pressure for those awardees that are getting into this and starting to run.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Chad. I know we're going to dig down on some of those coming up, but back to you, Jeremiah. So I'm a non-awardee. What are the things that I'm dealing with today?
Yeah, Chad outlined some stressors there that are putting stress on our operators today, and I think that applies somewhat universally across both awardees and non-awardees when we think about the competitive pressures, the restricted supply chains, labor pools, et cetera. And using Chad's sort of start line race analogy, plenty of states, the firing gun's already gone off and the race is underway. But that is potentially a good thing for the non-awardees. These folks, these fiber operators or ISPs, just operators in general, they essentially have their competitors' roadmap laid out before them. That's intelligence and data that they can leverage for better strategic positioning. So maybe you need to look at your strategy and decide, how can I bolster my existing footprint? How can I further penetrate within these markets to increase take rates or ARPUs? Or is there actually a play where I know I have some opportunity to expand and sort of create a buffer zone where maybe I start playing nicely with the competitor who's moving in there by diversifying my own product catalog? Who knows, right? But that strategic positioning now is where the non-awardees need to be thinking.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So, Chad, let's dig in a little bit to the awardees here, and we're probably going to get some hate mail for this headline about winning was the easy part. But I mean, is that an exaggeration, or how do you see that?
No, I think as the best of bargain deal came out, I mean, honestly, right now we're talking about, and we mentioned them earlier, is workforce and supply constraints, right? Everybody's starting at that same starting line. The shotgun goes off, and all of a sudden, I'm reaching out to the same people that 3 other ISPs are reaching out to. So it's not an exaggeration to say that the workforce pool today is already shallow, and we're going to stress it 5x. So that's part one. And then add that same complexity to the material aspect of it, right? And let's throw in another curveball at them and say has to be BABA compliant or wait for a waiver. So I think there's still a lot of red tape that's hanging out there on that. And if you're not doing that today, that's a huge hurdle that you have to overcome. And just to touch on it quickly and not beat this poor horse, but I mean, realistically, we're talking about workforce to get it done. We really need to also take into consideration the permit agencies and the power companies that we're going to be working with to achieve this. Their workforce pool is existing as it has for the last 5 to 10 years. And then we're going to throw a workforce at it 5x the overall take, right? So they too, working with them has to be side by side, and it has to be a today's conversation, not a tomorrow's conversation. Which leads me to my next point. I mean, every part of this is timing for reimbursements based upon completion. So whether it's, getting all your permits turned in, check the box, another influx of money comes in, okay, I can now order my materials come in, check the box. These are all timed events. So anything you can do right now de-risks how this program is going to work for you. So I think a lot of it comes into what can you do today that's going to make you successful tomorrow. And then speaking of, design aspects and starting to look at how this all works, we know what we did on our desktops or what we thought was physically in the field. That's not real, right? So field variability is a thing. Mm-hmm. When we start putting boots on the ground, we start looking at the poles, we start looking at, hey, this looked like a little stream on my map, but oh, by the way, it's protected and I have to do some extra permitting. You're starting to run into problems already. So again, it's one of those things where if a customer or an ISP provider has a BEAD award, get out there, drive it off. It may be in your backyard. There may be a lot of people who really swung for the fences and they're going into spaces they've never been, right? Start looking at these things realistically. And a lot of people have. It's not that they haven't. It's just get to know it, intimately. Like that, this is going to be your plant. Make sure you know. So I think that's huge. And then a couple of quick notes, and I'll let Jeremiah jump in. I mean, it's compliance complexity. It's going to be really making sure that whatever your build is going to work. And when you actually get it completed, what's QC process to turn it over? Because they're going to come out, they're going to check it out, they're going to do a field audit. Auditing is going to be a big portion of this. So making sure that all the boxes are checked so that at the end of the day, you get reimbursed for what you've completed, because let's face it, there's going to be a lot of funding going out, but that comes on whose dime right out of the gate, right? So we got to make sure the contractors and the material are getting all accomplished. We want to make sure we hedge our bets. We want to make sure that all the boxes get checked in a timely fashion. And then I think, honestly, the last part that I'm going to harp on, and I'm sorry, Pete, but I mean, it's this, when you start shaving away at a project and you're trying to save money, I think internal resources and project management is probably one of the first thing that goes, right? I've got a guy out in the field. He knows this plant inside and out. He's built thousands of miles. He's going to manage this. That's going to be probably one of the most critically impacted positions that I could possibly think of, because they're focused on getting it done. They're not checking the box on, did I grab the BABA compliant equipment? Am I making sure that I check the boxes? Oh, by the way, there's an audit coming out, and is he going to stop to sit down and go through with the state broadband office to make sure that they're doing everything that they need to do to stay out of an audit check or stop, if you will. So I think as far as everything that we're looking at, there's a lot of steps that you could take to be safe. But I'm still nervous about the things that people aren't looking at and or even thought of.
Yeah, no, those are all great points. Jeremiah, you want to add some color to that?
Well, I think first I want to just distance myself from the headline there that winning was the easy part. Pete, those were not my words. It's probably too soon to make that claim for some of these guys who are in the trenches of BEAD right now. But I do love the points that Chad made. I think they're very valid. A more traditional or sort of legacy approach to this sort of program execution has been to procure and build, and then there be a lag where the data that's coming out of the field has to be reconciled. And that lag is very dangerous in the BEAD environment, given that we're dealing with a reimbursement program, we're dealing with a market shift and restructuring. And so we can't afford any sort of execution risk. We have to be able to prove upon completion, and the sooner the better, at the service location, that we've met these milestones and our requirements. So I think that in general, just to maybe summarize what Chad was saying there, we need to build project management, data access, data agility, compliance into every stage of the process. So that way we can balance, consumer experience with pricing, with network operations, with build out milestones.
Yeah, we're going to thank you for that, gentlemen. So before we unpack the non-awardees, we do have another poll that I just want to have our audience go through. So the question is, what is your biggest pain point during your build, right? Is A, labor and make ready delays, B, supply chain variability, C, cost overruns, or D, build versus budget misalignment. So if you guys can take a second to go through that while we're unpacking the non-awardees, and we'll come back to the poll results there. So Jeremiah, let's start with you on that.
Yeah. So, for non-awardees, we had since I picked on you just now, Pete, about our headline there, I can pick on our poll and audience members. We had 27% that said that they're sort of forming a plan still. Was that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for those, I think that no change is a conscious choice, and it's probably a bad one. We need to be focused on building a strategy that is centered on risk assessment right now. The roots of what awardees and non-awardees need to differentiate themselves and to succeed are pretty much the same. And so we need to think about how to build those strategies in right now that we're on the start line. And that is with an understanding of the competitor's roadmap. How might you prevent against revenue erosion through some sort of diversification effort, right? So could we look at different types of infrastructure expansion, better utilization of existing network assets, or providing sort of middle mile, last mile, wholesale, you name it, connectivity solutions beyond what you do today. So there has to be a change because the market is changing.
Yeah, Chad, do you want to add to that, and then we'll go back to the poll?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of the creativity that's going to happen here is it's not all doom and gloom. I think there's going to be some opportunities that you can work with your neighbor on and possibly build out, reach out, maybe even use them as a middle mile entity. I think those are all great talking points. But I do want to, touch back on in my past and today, I even work with some older HFC networks that are just, they did the bare minimum and it's nothing against them. They just had a good niche market where they could actually deploy, and everybody was happy. But the unfortunate change in the BEAD program now brings it to their doorstep, right? Or at least even through their town for some folks. So I think, making sure that you understand what's coming your way, because the wave is coming if this does apply to you, and then knowing that you have to do something, right? Or else it's just going to be one of those things where they slowly take over. So, long story short, now is the time. If you think about it, and I kind of touched on it at the slide previous, was you got the awardees getting their money eventually here. I want to say, and I say that with a grain of salt. I mean, it's 6 months commitment once it's in the state's hands. Most states are doing it within 3 to 4, so they're moving as fast as they can. Nothing against these state broadband offices; they're doing what they can to help out and get the funding out. But for those non-awardees, that's your time. Like, you can start moving now. So that's actually the benefit of, to actually say, I know they're coming, I've got to do something. And at the end of the day, it's really just to, hang on to your existing customer base, maybe even hedge your bets on the outer markets of your areas. And it may be the next area that's building up a cul-de-sac as the example. You don't have to build a whole awarded area. You just got to build a little footprint. So even then, that concept is within, I would say, as far as, a benefit to actually having that done now.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So before we move forward, let's go back to the poll, right? So the question was, what is your biggest pain point during your build? Overwhelmingly, 67%, labor and make-ready delays. Supply chain variability is a third. Nobody's over budget, and there's no misalignment, which is fantastic, right? So any reaction to those, guys?
Actually, I thought maybe a little build versus budget would be a thing, but I'm happy to hear that people nailed it. That's awesome.
Well, the labor and make ready delays, I think, resonates with some of the points you're making, Chad, and that we have to be nimble, because it's now maybe less about the perfect design and more about where you can permit, where you can build, given whatever is allowable right then and there. So I think and you said, like, oh, maybe I just build to this one cul-de-sac because that's what I can reach for whatever reason, material, labor, permitting. So that sort of nimble strategy, I think, matches what this poll result is telling us right now.
Absolutely.
Well, it's interesting because one of the, the next slide is talking about execution as the primary risk. So we don't have any budget or delays going on there. I mean, is that an obvious statement? I feel like operational excellence, execution's always been a focus. What's different now? Chad, do you want to start with this?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's what we touched on a little bit ago, and everybody, in the poll, it resonates with, right? I mean, we're going to be applying, I keep calling it 5X. I want to say doubled, tripled. I mean, for the amount of work that's going to happen, it's going to be 5X easily. And again, touching base on the permit agencies that they're not getting any funding at all. They just got to show up and do their job. And now all of a sudden this wave of permits come in. So what Jeremiah brought up a second ago is a great and excellent point. Target permitting is going to be a huge consideration with achieving an award. So I think that's first and foremost. Also, I think supply chain. I really want to be delicate here because there's a lot of folks who have already bought some equipment that said it may have a waiver, or they're working towards a waiver. There's a lot of state broadband offices that you're gonna have. You better be having that conversation with them, because if anybody can say they're working towards a waiver, it doesn't mean it's happening. So I think that's key and critical. If you have it in stock, great. Just make sure that it's committed, it's signed, and you can indeed have that equipment ready to go. So I think that's probably number 2 on my hit list of just making sure the boxes are checked. And then, again, cost. And I really was surprised to see that, just due to the fact that literally 4 years ago, things don't cost what they do today, right? I think that's probably one of the bigger things that kind of surprised me with the poll was, and of course, I think the best of bargain round gave everybody that flexibility to true things up. But I do believe that's one of the things that we're gonna have to watch out for. I mean, take the political nature out of it. I mean, we all are paying $4 at the pump for gas today. That's just facts, and I think that's probably one of the bigger things, because the build versus budget misalignment, that's, take out the fact that this pole line got removed last year. We didn't catch it because we didn't drive it off. I mean, things cost more. So now I think that budget misalignment is a little bit more real. So that's my take on it. That's my quick spin on it as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's another. You may have got a true up. It is a snapshot of costs. Taking a year or two to build things out. Costs are just going to keep going up. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Jeremiah, do you want to add a little bit to that?
Well, Pete, I was curious maybe with operators that you interact with regularly, what you're seeing them do well, to execute at that next level. But I will just say, from a risk mitigation standpoint, where we typically suffer when executing, whether the suffer is a wastage of material or time or a lag to reporting or whatever it might be, is, I think, the ability to move from one stage of the process to the next. Like if you look at these transition points between plan, design, build, operate, and maintain, those transition points can sometimes take much longer to move through than they should. And what Chad is telling us is that with the pressure on the industry, we have to be flexible. We have our network and our business in multiple stages simultaneously. So I think to mitigate that risk, we need to think about, do we have the data integrity, the data access, and sort of the systems in place to maintain simultaneous stages all at once? But Pete, I mean, to prevent us from being all doom and gloom here, have you seen some sort of good news from an execution standpoint with some operators that you know?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. There's some vertical integration that we're seeing over the last couple of years where people are trying to remove that risk by bringing in capabilities in-house, right, to kind of get ahead of that, but also just trying to get their systems aligned, right? So kind of taking a best of breed approach where your contractors are working from the same system architecture or network that you have, right? So then you have consistent data model, and you're not tracking down, rework and data, just from a data quality issue. I think people are getting much more savvy on that point. And I think going back to Chad's point about the importance of project management, right? That's setting up that governance from the get-go, right? And aligning all your systems. I think that's something that will help. People have had success doing that, and I think that's really going to be an enabler moving forward. Let's see. Next slide is on compliance is no longer a work stream, or excuse me. Compliance is no longer reporting. It's a workflow, right? So Jeremiah, let's unpack that one. I think it's a great concept that we just started leaning into here.
Yeah. So maybe to tell tales here on mistakes I've made in the past as an operator, it was win funding, build to meet milestones. And then lastly, either assign compliance as an additional duty to existing your work team and workflows, or, when everything breaks, to go hire someone last minute and try to figure it out, right? And so we've said multiple times today, do not do that. And I'm speaking from personal experience when I say do not do that. So this workflow, let's start with the fact that we're looking at broadband service locations, right? BSLs, we're looking at rooftops. So the location level reporting is so different than thinking about census blocks and sort of serviceability reach of the past. To get that right, you need to trust your location data in the first place.
Yeah.
The address that you designed to, is it the same address that you're going to report against? And the second that location is serviceable and you've gone through the milestones to activate that demand point, can you report against it? So I think that's why we're emphasizing here that this is a workflow. It's not just sort of a PDF that you generate after the fact.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So Chad, I mean, this is all good advice, but can we, there's a lot going on. Can this industry shift fast enough to start enabling or taking on these best practices that we're suggesting?
It's a have to. Jeremiah touched on it on the previous slide. I think with everybody is submitting for their NEPA approval, starting to get permits back, extra attention towards some really difficult builds that are going to happen. That whether NEPA pointed out or else you're going to find on your own with your own agencies of permitting locally. We're going to have to there, or else you're going to wait, the whole 3 to 4 years to build the system out, and no one's out there to wait that long. So I think it's going to have to be that way. It's not a we have to get into that mindset. So parts of that are performance validation. Anybody who's trying out something new, try it out soon, try it out early, get it installed, get it in. There's not many, but there are a handful of folks that are just, they're jumping from HFC to fiber, just get the system in there, get familiar with it, know what your testing is going to have to be, how you're going to have to perform, what you're going to have to turn in. It's all a part of the technical auditing aspect of it. And I think that's probably one of the bigger takeaways is, what's going to be required from your state broadband office, from your representative, once you turn something up. So again, the sooner you can get started with that, along with, where your crews are and their availability, those are all going to tie together. And then again, this is all in avoidance of and I call it the threat, but there's going to be some guidelines on what the clawback looks like. Like if you're not achieving your timelines, you're not getting it done. Well, what's going to happen? And again, clawback, that's the last thing anybody wants to hear. We're all trying to get this done. We all want to make sure that, everybody gets internet, especially in the rural demographics. But the reality of it is that it's set up with the state broadband office. So working hand in hand with them on all the key points, that's day one.
Yeah, no, that's great. So listen, guys, we've kind of laid a lot out there. Hopefully it's not all doom and gloom. Some of the key points here, if we want to run through them, the data that's out there is probably the most valuable competitive data set we've ever had, right? Knowing from the data quality, but also where your competitors are going. So helping to understand how to use that data to predict where your competitor's going, identify those, like you pointed out, Chad, a couple of times. He doesn't have to build out these massive segments, but buffer zones potentially, right? Or as Jeremiah proposed, changing your business model to create competitive barriers to entry where possible, right? The last piece on the right-hand side, it's a short window, right? So 18 to 36 months, the lot's changed in the previous 18 to 36 months for the people that weren't waiting for BEAD. There's a lot of growth and progress. I think that's going to continue to accelerate. I guess, gentlemen, is there anything you would add to this slide or to this recap, Chad?
From my perspective, if you're a non-awardee, now's the time. Really, honestly, the cards are truly on the table. I would definitely take that as a leg up and really do a review of where you want to be in the next, I would say, year, and just be prepared. And then as far as for all the BEAD awardees, yeah, and I'm saying this because it's really important, but you're right, Pete. I don't want to be all doom and gloom. Number one, congratulations. Number two, realistically, even if you're a little off on your budget, the reality behind it is you have funding to help you build this thing, so it's not 100% out of pocket. So again, I don't want to be all doom and gloom and the world, the sky's falling, but it's more along the lines of you're getting funding. Even if we all talk about the amount of money and 25% down, right? Well, even if it turned into you had to put a little more into it, and you still built, you got more BSLs that you're achieving and reaching out to and getting online, and it costs you about 40% in capital. No one wants to hear that, but in the end of the day, you didn't do 100% out of pocket. So it's all good in the long run. It's just making sure that everybody understands that these are some really critical points that you can work on now, get ahead of the curve, and just be more successful in the long run.
Yeah. So Jeremiah, I'm going to jump to the next slide and talk a little bit about the data. You've laid some of that out, right? And that headline says a lot, right? That if your data is wrong, your strategy is wrong. What's the intention there?
Yeah, so let's continue Chad's narrative there and look at this from a glass half full perspective. For both awardees and non-awardees, let's treat BEAD as the compelling event required to find the operational efficiencies that you could enjoy if you would just get your house in order. So with data access, first is data access, right? Can you collectively look at your network and your business and your customers and understand your opportunities. From there, how do you promote data integrity across the enterprise? I think those two ideas are fundamental in the fact that we're dealing with a more competitive ball game here, right? The margins are thinner, the competition is increasing. So if we have great situational awareness over our network and where we are winning and where we can expand to win more, then your strategy is inherently going to be a bit better. Additionally, you might be leaving opportunity on the table and not even realize it if your data is wrong. If you don't understand, for example, your network's reach, its capacity and its consumption levels, then when someone comes asking for backhaul or for market reach or you name it, you're not going to be prepared to answer that question, and you need to be prepared.
Yeah, Chad, you want to tackle the kind of recap on the infrastructure strategy there?
Yeah, I just, again, resonating with what Jeremiah just said, the middle mile aspect of it is extremely important to understand, because I think, with reaching out to folks that are building up to your back door, that's not always the bad thing. That could actually help both parties out. So, obviously understanding who those folks are, being able to, communicate with them and understand their strategy in life today, that's great. That's actually giving you more opportunity. So again, looking at the glass half full aspect of it. And I think that does really, open up the door for wholesale opportunities as far as, reaching out to a complex or reaching to another portion of your network that you never had the opportunity to reach to before. That's actually fantastic ideas as far as, looking at it in a positive light. And then, multi-tenant infrastructure aspects of this is just saying, BSLs were covered here, for 50% of this area, but we got this pocket that's built out there. It's an MDU. We're gonna build out to that. Can we hop on a strand of fiber and go out there and get it? I think those are all great things. So I mean, realistically, again, it's not all bad news, right? It's a glass half full, as Jeremiah stated.
Oh, Chad, that early communication too is great. You mentioned that there, and tying it back to an earlier idea, because the places we want to take our networks are under pressure themselves, right? The permitting, the pole access, the easement access, as that becomes congested and you deal with a backlog of requests, if you're engaged early in where you want to go to partner with those utilities, then you could kind of get to the top of the queue, right, to the top of the stack, but only if your data is correct and actionable. So I like the idea of communicating early, not just maybe internally or with investors or with the state broadband offices, but also with those other utility partners.
Yeah, utility partners, pole owners, permitting agencies. Honestly, like, I go back to, this is old school, but I remember we always had a pre-construct and you had everybody with a coffee mug sitting around a truck with the maps laid out on the hood. I mean, that's kind of like virtually what we have to do here, is just make sure that everybody's there and in attendance, and everybody knows the game plan. And some people are going to play ball and others are going to just, turn around and say, no, we have our own plans, and that's fine, but at least they know. And then in return, it'd be great if, what you find out from intel from those meetings and those conversations.
Yeah, so let's bring it on home, right? So we laid out a lot there, a lot of great suggestions. As you can see on the left-hand side, the awardees. So if you won, really think about how to embed compliance as a work stream into your operations end to end, right? Being able to track and build and cost in real time and reconcile that for good cost control, and validate the service availability. On the non-awardee side, there's a lot of great intelligence baked into the BEAD data that you're probably already looking at. There's definitely some different strategies and partnerships that you should be looking at to help take advantage while folks are waiting for their BEAD money. There's a window, so it's time to get going. And to really help you figure out where those high value expansion zones are, right? It may not just be a typical edge out, I got a couple questions that I want to throw out to you guys. Something that we haven't talked about, we talked a little bit about the permitting and the friction within kind of a local municipalities. But what about community engagement, right? There's been lots of talk of years and years of reels around BEAD, right? But just because you won funding doesn't mean the community understands what that means, or maybe they misaligned expectations. I wonder, Chad, if you have any suggestions on how to handle that.
Like, honestly, quite honestly, you signed your award. Obviously franchise agreements is a consideration if you've never been there before, but community engagement is going to be key and critical. And I look at the other side of it. Again, I'll take the negative road and let Jeremiah jump on the positive train here. But reality is you're going to have that guy that lives in an area or out in the sticks, if you will, rural demographic, and he's been watching BEAD forever and a day, and he keeps hitting refresh, and he knows it's coming. So now he's your number one phone caller from day one to day 356. So engagement soon is also critical, and that goes back to that communication aspect. And that's you call it a great point, Pete. It's not just the entities to help you build it. It's also the demographic, the BSLs themselves.
Yeah, Jeremiah, positive spin on that?
Oh goodness, Chad set me up for failure. Hey, the country mile is long to reach some of these BSLs, and the definition of a neighbor gets stretched too. But here's what operators know. Again, we've harped on this, and that is that the roadmap is public, and state broadband offices are making announcements where they're calling out awardees, saying, "Hey, they're our first awardee. They're coming. This is good news." And so, by the time you reach a market, or as you try to maintain your presence within an existing market, you don't want the consumer to already be soured by the fact that it took you too long to get there. So I think proactive engagement is always in your interest, and it goes back to having your data in a place where it can be easily understood and accessed. So being able to go into a town hall event, or pay for a billboard or whatever it might be, to be able to outline succinctly what you're doing to bring this level of service to an area that needs it and that is hungry for the competition, has to be part of the strategy.
Yeah, I would add to that, fellas, that affordability has to be front and center too, right? Because you're managing expectations. We just talked a lot about execution risk and cost. By the time the service gets delivered, it's not, if we build it, they will come, right? I mean, they have options already, whether it's satellite or DSL, that are much cheaper, right? So I think getting ahead of those issues, so you're not disappointing after all these years of work and delivering, and get angry neighbors. It's something to think about.
Well said, Pete.
I wanted to come back to 2 points, and you guys can tell me, keep it simple. We talked about clawbacks as a potential threat and risk. Just, what's the probability, just to number wise, what you guys think that clawbacks would actually be enacted as part of BEAD? I'll let Chad go, since he's always bringing it up.
It's literally, I think it's going to be revolving around the timeline aspect of BEAD deployment. So, as the states had pressure applied to them to get this done, get it going, and get it out the door, I think that's going to resonate with what the federal government and the state broadband offices are expecting. They're going to want this thing built. You have the funding for it. You signed on the dotted line. It's time to let's get this going. There are going to be some interesting factors that come into the equation of that. I think there's going to be the resource pool and understanding what that looks like. I think there's also going to be the material aspect of it. There's a lot of consideration around BABA compliance and fiber as the example, and there's a lot of material aspect vendor companies out there that are saying, nope, it's not an issue, don't worry about it, we're going to make it available, but at what cost? So I also want to throw that curveball in there, and I just think there's a lot of consideration to be made that if you're not getting your material within the first 6 months, and I've heard some horror stories already that this is a real issue. And again, it goes back to communication. Communicate soon, communicate early, communicate often with the state broadband office. Let them know what you're hearing. Let them know what you're experiencing. Let them know the risk, right? I mean, these are all considerations that have to be broadcasted upward. because you just don't want it to fall on your shoulders, and it's not right, and that's not what you signed up for. So obviously, just make sure that that gets pushed back, and that avoids the clawback. I think it's going to help, because we're all in this together to get it done. The rural demographic is what's going to benefit from this, and you as the provider, you want to protect them and yourself.
Yeah, Jeremiah, any thoughts on clawbacks?
You asked for a number, Pete. I'm gonna say 7. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'll say 7. I think clawbacks, some form of clawbacks are likely. Despite BEAD being restructured and changed over the past couple of years, you're talking about being technology agnostic and sort of other changes. I think what has not changed is a high level of accountability. The expectation that we are going to deliver to these locations. And so what does that mean? What would a clawback look like? I think we could spend a whole nother podcast on the potential implications of like the severity of what that is. But it should be motivation for all to take sort of the actions and pro tips that we outlined here.
Yeah, thank you for that. So last question for me is, we talked about Starlink kind of challenging or trying to get some rural slack from NTIA. Do we think NTIA is going to concede and help Starlink? And if so, what's the ramifications of that? Let's start with you, Jeremiah.
Yeah. Oh goodness, this is a tough one, Pete. So, will they concede? The desire for BEAD here is to bridge connectivity once and for all, right? To solve the connectivity challenges of the past. If we look at the trends of how the program has changed from where it began, then that trend line would indicate that there would be some sort of concession granted here for Starlink, right? And I think I'll just stop there and maybe let Chad disagree or agree how he chooses.
Oh, who's setting who up now? In all honesty, I think they're going to draw the hard line that the minimum bandwidth has to be met along with the latency. That was always key and critical to BEAD. I think that's part of it. So I think misperformance or underperformance, which is truly what the technical auditing aspect is all about, right? Also throw in the fact that you got a launch train of satellites up there to actually support areas. I'm going to take one step back and say this is why you have to sign on the dotted line with the states, because this is the reconsideration. Can you do it, right? So I think there's a lot of activity going on around it. I think there may be areas of participation, and there may be areas where they're going to pull back, to be honest with you. I think it's a split. I don't think it's a yes, no altogether. I think it's going to be in certain locations. It makes sense. It makes perfect sense. And it's not going to be a drain on what's provided today, where other areas are a little bit more densely populated. It's going to cost a lot more. Reality behind it, hypothetically, they're throwing out that a satellite lasts between 5 and 7 years. And then you got to turn around and keep that technical auditing up to speed. And launch more. When does that become, no return? So I think that's probably the consideration for some of these states.
Okay. We have one question about the data, right? And so I'm going to start with you, Chad. Can you speak to the accuracy or inaccuracy of the fabric data and its impact on planning networks? We're really looking for advice on verifying BSLs without sending boots on the ground.
And this is my take on it. I've scoured, ArcGIS, Google Maps. When you build out a system, really run through the paces, I understand what you're looking at. Just as a core example of it, Google Maps doesn't always update their stuff either. So you got to make sure that you're looking at something that's relevant, something that's up to date. Without boots on the ground, that's the best ideas I can give. But if there is a pocket, if you will, or an area that, doesn't look right. I'm not building to a hay bale, and I'm not going to build to a barn. if I'm in a pocket, I want to go out and see it, or find somebody in that area that's willing to go look at it on your behalf and make sure that, hey, if we're going to build this, and I'm gonna lay out 5-6 miles of fiber, I've got to make sure that's there.
Sure.
So I think that's part of it. It's key and critical just to make sure that the data is accurate and real.
Got it. All right. I think that's it. I just want to make sure that our guests know that Chad and team are around. Here's a little bit about CCI Systems. Chad, you just want to give a quick sentence on that?
Yeah, so CCI Systems, obviously founded in 1955. I can honestly say proudly that I've been there for 31 years. I know I look young, no one believes it, but it's wireline, wireless, energy, data centers, enterprise, tribal government. And I do want to call out that, I'll be actually attending Cable Labs myself, working towards Fiber Connect and the SCTE Expo. So if there's an interest to meet up with me, by all means, but I have a lot of team partners out there that will be attending the other shows. So by all means, please reach out, and we'll be sending out our contact info after the presentation here.
Jeremiah, you want to talk about VETRO?
Yeah, absolutely. So VETRO provides a huge number of fiber operators and a diverse mix of fiber operators, the best-in-class network system of record, where you can truly operationalize your network data across the enterprise to help increase the efficiency in your workflows. Founded in 2017, today bumping 400 customers, 10,000 unique users, and would love to have conversations on how we could partner with you to help you support operators or improve as an operator. You can find us at pretty much every trade show and conference coming up, and reach out via email or our website as needed. So.
All right. Hey, fellas, I really appreciate the dialogue. It's you guys have a lot of insight, and thank you for sharing it with our audience. And I want to thank our audience for taking the time to listen to us. If you have any additional questions, we'd be happy to answer them. And thank you to the FBA and Lisa for helping us pull this together.
Absolutely. And thank you to the audience. Again, this is a reminder to join us at Fiber Connect next month in Orlando. And for upcoming FBA webinars, you can scan the QR code on your screen or navigate to the events section of the FBA website. We hope everyone will join us for our Fiber for Breakfast webinar series featuring FBA President and CEO Gary Bolton. These are live every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern, and past episodes are available on YouTube and SoundCloud. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for our presenters, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks.